Okay, so we have a sort of summary for the simple exponential smoothing and the role of the parameters. First is the smoothing parameters, and then the initial forecast, the data. So you have the alpha. If it's close to 0, it means that the initial forecast plays a significant role for many time periods ahead. Because if it is close to 0, what happens is we will have less decrease in the weights. Okay. And then you have the alpha. If it's not close to 0 or close even to 1, then the initial forecast rapidly become of less significance, okay, as time goes by. So we're talking here about the relationship between the initial and the smoothing parameter, okay? So initial and the smoothing initial forecast, smoothing parameter, they sort of interact in this manner, okay? So if alpha is 0, the initial forecast plays a significant role for many time periods ahead. Okay? So, meron pang effect yung initial forecast sa mga succeeding forecasts. Okay? For many time periods. Yun ang ibig sabihin. Now, if alpha naman is not close to 0 or even close to 1, yung alpha natin, yung ating initial forecast is less na ang significance. Okay? So, mabilis mawala yung parang effect niya sa succeeding forecast. And then, smaller alpha means more smoothing. Okay? So, yan yung ibig sabihin. Mas smooth siya. Kung ating titingnan actually ang graph, kung mas maliit yung alpha natin, mas smooth. Wala masyado tayong fluctuation. Mas smooth siya. And then, more data means less weight for the initial forecast. So, as our forecast or as our observations come in, the initial forecast becomes less significant. So kung mas maraming data, medyo hindi na masyadong, wala na masyadong impact yung ating initial forecast. Yeah. Okay, so mayroon ba kayo mga questions, mga burning questions about this exponential smoothing na bago na discuss before we proceed to our next lesson? Okay, wala. Okay, so let's go now to trend methods. So the idea of trend methods is how does it differ? How does it improve the simple? So remember that the simple exponential is smoothing. You only take into account the level, right? See, this is the level component. Isa lang actually ang forecast. And that is only the level. So when you say level, it means that how far is that value from 0? Okay? Na positive, negative. Yun ang ibig sabihin. And this exponential smoothing is applicable to time series na walang ibang characteristic yung ating time series. Aside from, of course, it varies. Okay? From 0. So tawag natin doon is just the simple lang yun siya. Now, merong mga time series as na-discuss natin yung sa time series decomposition. Meron din mga time series na hindi lang siya simple na level lang ang nag-effect. But, meron pa siya ibang characteristic. Ano nga yung ibang mga characteristic niya? Let's Rivas, ano pa yung ibang characteristic ng ating time series na discuss? Pwede nyo i-type. Seasonality, yes. Okay, good. Ano pa? Meron ding cycle, good. Ano pa? The last one is Correct. T-R-E-N-D. Trend. So, yung trend is whether it increases or decreases over time. So, yun yung trend methods. Na, paano natin ngayon ma-incorporate itong trend, no, sa ating exponential smoothing kung may trend? And that is the topic for this lesson. Okay. So, pag sinabi nating trend, ang ibig sabihin, meron tayong component that accounts for the trend. Okay? It means that there is now a component that sort of we add to the level, okay, to make the forecast. So, notice that this equation is just the alternative form, okay? But with the added value, which is the trend component. So we have to estimate two components. First is the level, and then we need to estimate the trend. Okay. So ang level natin is same thing pa rin, but we need to take into account na may trend siya. We need to add the trend. Because if we remove this, our forecast would always be behind than the actual observation. Kasi nga, hindi na take into account na may trend pala siya. Kumbaga, let's say, sabihin natin we want to forecast the revenue of a certain store, sari-sari store, let's say, Riva sari-sari store. Okay? So, alam natin na ang revenue over time is nag-i-increase siya because possible na nag-i-increase yung price. Tama? Nag-i-increase yung price. So, dati yung isang 10 ay 5 pesos, ngayon ay 8 pesos na. So, we actually look at there's trend that can be accounted to the increasing prices or the decreasing value of money. Okay? So, yun yung trend. So, dapat, pag ano natin, yung information na yun, important siya to determine what will be our next forecast because it's not only will determine kung wala kasing trend, ang level is measured from the x-axis. Okay? From the x-axis. Now, if we have a trend, the level is actually measured. There is now a contribution of the distance from the trend line, from the trend curve to the actual observation. So for example, okay, wala kasing ano dito. Let's have a para mas ma-imagine natin. Okay. So kung titingnan natin, for example, titingnan natin yan. Example, this is our x-axis, no? Sample lang. And this is our, let us say, time series. Okay. Sample lang yan siya. Although pangit sa pagkasulat. The level that we're talking about, so for example, this is the reference line. The level that we're talking about is this. this distance. Okay? And then if we are considering this value, this is the level, okay? Yeah. So if this is the value again, so this is the level. Same here, this is the level. Okay, these are the level. Okay. Now, if we have a trend, hindi siya horizontal line because it's either decreasing or increasing. So, mangyari, example, ito na yung time series natin. Okay? So, we're actually looking at this line. Okay? So, yung kanina, ito lang, straight line lang siya, di ba? Straight line lang yan siya, straight line. And the level, ang only maka-apekto dyan sa mga values na yan is just the level. Okay, how far is that value from this horizontal line? Now, out in trend, hindi siya horizontal line, but it's a line that has slope different from zero. So it's either decreasing or increasing. But we can always still look at it as meron pa ring line dyan. Okay? And the value for this, okay, the value for this is the level, which is the distance from this line, plus the trend. Yan yung BT, ito yung LT. Okay? So kaya siya mini-measure din natin and estimate din natin itong BT. Assuming na increasing siya. Okay? Kuha ba? Idea? So ito yung point, ito yung level niya, which is the distance from the vertical distance from the trend line, plus the trend. Okay? So ito yung trend. Yeah? And our basis here is the x-axis. Correct? So that is the idea of this equation. Yan yung idea niya dito. LT plus HBT. But unlike the simple exponential na wala itong HBT, LT lang. So di ba ang tawag natin doon is flat forecast. Because no matter how far we make the forecast would be the same. Diba? No? But in trend, the forecast is no longer flat because depende na ngayon kung how far. Because the H here, so for example, kung H natin dito is 5, so we make forecast, so let us say H equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It will now be different because the time in the future will affect how much of the trend we take into account. Okay? So kung positive yan, nag-increase din siya. Tama? Kung negative naman siya, nag-decrease din siya. So our forecast is no longer flat, but it's a actual forecast na may trend or increasing or decreasing. Okay, so how do we determine the LT? So the same lang siya, no? Yung kanina, di ba? Ito lang man siya. Yung alpha YT. 1 minus alpha LT. Di ba? Yun lang naman siya. But ngayon, lalagyan na natin siya ng trend. Okay, the level plus the trend. And then the observe. And of course, for the trend equation, it's very simple, no? It's just the difference between the levels with a certain weight plus 1 minus given the previous trend. Ganyan lang siya ka-simple. Okay. So what happens when B star is close to 1? Ano mangyayari dyan sa tingin ninyo kung ang close to 1? So kung titignan natin dito, kung close to 1 siya, mabibigyan ngayon yung more weight yung difference ng level compared dito sa trend. But if it is close to 0, mas mabigyan ng pansin yung trend compared dito sa change in the level. Correct? So yan yung idea ng, ang tawag sa method na ito is Holt's linear trend method. Okay. So, for Holt's method, forecasted trend is constant. Okay? Hindi yan nagbabago. Kailan nagbabago lang ang ating forecasted, it's because we have age. Differs how far we make the forecast. Okay? Kaya lang meron kasi mga cases na hindi naman talaga strictly increasing. Hindi din naman talaga strictly decreasing. Kasi pwede naman siya di ba nakita niyo meron siyang pababa, pa-increase, pababa, pa-increase, pababa, pa-increase within that local neighborhood. Kaya lang, dito kasi talagang line ang ibibigay niya sa'yo. Hindi yung parang ganito, you know. Parang ganito. Di ba? Pwede man siya magganyan-ganyan. Pero increasing pa rin siya. Whereas kung mag-forecast ka from here, ibibigay talaga niya is ganyan talaga, straight lang. Or kung pababa naman siya, hindi na siya maganyan-ganyan. But ibibigay niya na forecast is ganyan na straight. Ganyan na ibibigay niya na forecast. Okay? So yan yung ibig sabihin ng statement na yan. Okay. Yes. So kaya nga sinasabi dito, it can be problematic for longer forecast horizon kasi nga hindi natin alam as we move ahead in the future kung talaga bang nag-i-increase, baka biglang mag-decrease, biglang mag-increase ng mas malaki or yung increase na is hindi masyadong malaki.